Night shift gas station clerks of Reddit. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? I was working at a mobile late one night in my hometown, which is a summer vacation hotspot, when a middle-aged man who looked like he just walked off a golf course. He was obviously a little drunk, but drunk middle-aged men who golf was the norm for tourists, so I took no heed. He came up to the counter, and I heard him ask me if there were any gay bars in town. I told him no, that the closest one I was aware of was in Provincetown, a gay hotspot which was an optimistic hour drive away with traffic. He then asked me if I was interested in fooling around with him. I replied no, and in an attempt to soften the rejection I joked, "I don't think my girlfriend would be too happy about that," which seemed to excite the guy as he redoubled his efforts. His big pitch was that he had an especially nice van that we could pull into the garage bay to use. Granted, it looked like a nice van, but didn't sway my stance. After another 5 minutes he seemed to resign to his fate, and he left the store. I thought we were done, and went back to reading. Half an hour later I hear a car start up and leave the lot. I didn't realize he had just stayed in his van and was waiting for me. I figured, creepy, but whatever, he's gone, so I put it out of my mind. A couple hours after that I was closing up shop, and I had to go out on a ladder to change the prices on the sign for the next day. The town is deserted at this point and all the lights at the station were off save a couple in the garage. While I'm up on the ladder the same van screeches back into the lot. I'm up on a ladder in the dark alone, not thrilled about this development. He hopped out and hollered, "I forgot to pay you." I figured that I had given him smokes or something and just forgot to charge him as I was rejecting his advances, so I asked him for what. He replied, "I forgot to try and pay you for a good time." I paused. He yelled $250. It occurred to me that I could probably just take the dude's money and run, but I correctly assessed that would be really stupid, so I yelled, "Man, no means no," still on the ladder. He yelled, "Jesus Christ, fine," and peeled out. Never saw him again, thankfully. Not a gas station, but a train station cafe. There were overnight works going on, so we stayed open until 1 or 2 AM for the builders. One night this older gentleman comes in, well dressed, asks for a coffee, but can't pay when I make it. I give it to him anyway, since I'll just throw it otherwise, and he asks me for some cake. I refuse, and he goes, "Icing for my supper," and then starts to belt out Frank Sinatra right there in the shop. And he just won't stop. He's there for like half an hour. I tried to get security to look after him because he clearly wasn't all there. Found him later, singing for the builders who were giving him sandwiches. Eventually called the local police who got him supervised until he could catch a train home in the morning. I worked in a rural gas station garage when I was in high school. One evening I was working, and there were some pretty bad storms brewing. It didn't take long for there to be a fairly large group of people stopped at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it, wasn't the first time it had happened, but then they started blowing the tornado sirens. All of a sudden there's a bunch of adults and families looking at little 16-year-old me looking for answers. There's no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all in the walk-in cooler. Shut us all in and rode out the storm. When it passed I went out and there was a big plate glass window busted and some shit blown around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and were pretty much like, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself like what the hell just happened. Years ago I worked overnights at a gas station in a pretty bad neighborhood in Florida. My first night working there an older guy came in, walked up to the counter, and reached across and punched me in the jaw pretty hard. The guy I was working with chased him out the door while I called the cops to send someone over. My coworker came back in pretty quick looking frightened and said to send an ambulance because the crazy guy just died outside. EMT and police came. Guy was alive, but had a pretty bad heart attack. Every other shift was pretty timid compared to that. I had a friend who worked at a gas station. He said someone came in one night and produced a gun and told my friend to empty the register. Being completely dumbfounded by the situation, my friend told him that he had to buy something first. This is because to open the register an item from the gas station needed to be scanned at the register. According to my friend, they stared at each other completely silent and bewildered for a few seconds. After that, my friend had regained enough of his faculties to explain this to the robber. Then the robber scanned a Twix, took all the money in the register and left. Bought some gas one night before pay at the pump, and when I came inside, saw the clerk was my friend and from high school, maybe a couple of years ago. Then we have a grand old reunion through the pay slot under the glass before he buzzes me inside. I comment on how bulletproof the place looks, and he says it's supposed to be. I was on my way home from a girls' night out and had nothing to do, so sat on a stool and we traded what we knew people were up to, blah blah blah. Suddenly this guy in a black hoodie just materializes at the pay slot and I clearly hear the words, "All the money, I have a gun." Inch thick glass or not, I'm ready to freak, but I hear Dan's calm voice, "I'm sorry, sir, but company policy is that I have to see the gun, or I could lose my job." The guy holds his finger up like just a second and fishes out this big black handgun from his cargo pants. He presents it in two hands, like he's looking to pawn it. I can see a big screw at the bottom of the grip, which looks funny, but what do I know? Dan again, I'm sorry, that's just a pellet gun, sir, and that doesn't qualify. The would-be robber packs up and leaves, muttering a sumbitch as he goes. Dan calls the cops and sees I'm shaking. He gives me a hug and points out the pay slots are scooped into the counter so that a hand around a gun can't possibly fit under the glass the owner had shown him with a plastic gun. I still thought that was pretty cool of my school buddy. I don't work night shift exactly, but this will work. So, my store closes up at 10 PM. I come in one morning at around 4:45 to find an old Native American man passed out in our kitchen. We have a rather large kitchen because we work next to an industrial area with lots of truck drivers / oil field workers who start their work day early, so we make lots of food for breakfast and lunch. So I call the police, because what the hell am I supposed to do? There's a very bad neighborhood behind the store that's constantly hit for drug busts, like hard stuff, plus we find bloody needles in the bathrooms all the time. The police show up like 15 minutes later with some paramedics and the guy was just asleep. Apparently he came in around 9:30 PM the night before to use the bathroom and got locked in when the two night shift employees locked up. He didn't have a phone and didn't think to look for ours, so he got a 6-pack of beer out, ate some of our bread, and went to sleep next to the grill. I don't know if this was necessarily weird, but more luck. During and after high school I worked at this crappy gas station that closed up at 11 PM. I started doing my cleaning duties when I noticed a penny on the ground. I picked it up, kept sweeping, until I noticed a dime by the door. This wasn't unusual, since people drop change all the time. As I was picking it up though, something caught my eye as it blew past the door. I went outside, looked right, nothing, looked left, and there sat a fat wad of cash. It was nearly $300 laying on the ground. Yes, I kept it. No one ever stopped back by asking about it either. A friend of mine worked nights in a convenience store by herself, and she told me about a time when a woman came in drenched in blood. When asked, she said flatly, "Don't worry, it's not my blood." She bought a pack of cigarettes and was on her merry way. I was a 7-Eleven night clerk for about 5 years when I was young. Nothing too outrageous happened. The big nightly event was the 2 AM rush, the cutoff for selling alcohol, when I'd run a bar through the beer cooler doors. There was always a bunch of people coming in just before, and always a few coming in after that would beg and argue, and I'd just have to say no. One time around 3 AM an older drunk but well-dressed Mexican guy comes in, two really pretty girls with him, argues and pleads with me to sell him some beer for about 15 minutes. He was oddly pleasant, seemed like a guy no one said no to, but I said no. He went out with the girls, then came back in alone, looked at me and smiled, pulled a giant wad of bills from his pocket, and peeled off a 20, sat it on the counter, walked over to the cooler, and pulled out a case of beer through the bars. Then as I'm telling him I can't sell that to him, he reaches in his other pocket and pulls out a baggie of coke, wags it in the air in front of me significantly, sits that on the $20 bill, and says "Esta todo bien, mi amigo," with a wink, and walks out the door with the beer. Another time around 3 AM again these two young girls came in and wandered the store for about a half hour, laughing their asses off at everything. literally rolling on the floor laughing, reading the labels of the candy bars and stuff like that. I talked to them enough that they told me they'd eaten some mushrooms. Finally they picked out a couple of candy bars and a couple sodas. At the counter I rang them up, and they realized they didn't have any money, which was hilariously funny, and they were on the floor laughing again. I bagged their stuff and told them not to worry about it. Sweeping the lot, after they left I could hear them still laughing down the street. That's it for today. Do all the YouTube things and I'll see you all tomorrow.